always rely on a joyful mind, which involves a discovery that I made in high school. I had sort of the proof that it was possible to do something like this. I was part of a Shakespeare play. My English teacher always put on a Shakespeare play every year, and so I had the part of the fool. Go figure. And everything seemed to be going really well. I was having a really good time. Everybody's kind of laughing at me, which is the right thing to do. And then we had the dress rehearsal. And it was like, you turned on the monitor to see what the heart is doing, and it's like flat. I was completely off. I was so terrible. And I knew it. Well, I knew it while it was happening. And afterwards, everybody's kind of, kind of wandering off, sort of muttering, and can't really even look at me because the shock. And I went home, and I was completely, totally aghast and depressed, and just lying. I remember lying on my bed, just stunned, and thinking, oh, well, let's see, it's the day after tomorrow, and this thing goes live. And my mind was going through all the stories. And I looked and I thought, this could go on like this for a long time. These stories, they're very catchy. They're very convincing. And I realized, actually, I didn't have to keep going with them. I could just totally drop it. And in that, there's like the contrast between that moment of anxiety and depression and despair, and then what came afterwards was so stark that I never forgot that moment, that it was actually possible to not be trapped by my own stories, that it was possible to actually kind of go someplace else. And fortunately, I'm kind of I have another kind of autopilot which involves kind of more happy-go-lucky. So I have this other thing that I could, something else I could go to. And that it actually, it's a very powerful thing when you actually can have that kind of experience and see that actually I can drop this and there's something else quite positive can be there. And one of the things in starting to practice the Dharma and being involved in the mind training a little bit, particularly this provocative, always rely on a joyful mind, it's one of the things that's possible is to have a sense that I can bring loving kindness or compassion to any situation. I can bring just kind of good-heartedness. I can arrive with that. I don't need to wait to see whether it's going to go my way or go against me, or I don't need to wait for that before I kind of give my imprimatur of, oh, this is good or this is terrible. I can actually meet situations in a positive way. And with the death and dying class, and also the funeral that we just went to, and being with people who were actively dying in this last year, this has been kind of a major theme that's kind of popped up throughout this year for us. And it seems it's very awkward to jump into always rely on a joyful mind in the midst of something that's really difficult if you have not done it in other situations. If you've not done it in kind of neutral situations where you bring the kind of the basic positive capacity you go into the room of somebody who's having real difficulty, health difficulty and emotional difficulties, and then you think, oh, I don't know what to do. I should rely on a joyful mind, and then you start trying to conjure this in the moment. It's probably not going to work out very well, because our usual habits would start free associating. Joyful, oh, I just smile a lot. I can kind of laugh a little bit too loud. You actually have to do it somewhere else in the most just start meeting very neutral situations in your life with this kind of more positive engagement. And then you can start to see what this more sort of this natural basic capacity for well-being, you can start to see where that is. And then all the interactions and reactions that happen when they're very difficult situations can still have this fundamental element in the background of our own potential for well-being. And then it can feel like, oh, I can bring this and add this to the situation, as opposed to adding to the situation the burden of me feeling bad about everything and my own incapacity for relating to this situation and my own negative reactions about my own incapacity, blah, 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 blah. But it's, so it takes, that's why it's called practice. It takes practice. And it's possible to see kind of what actually is possible when we bring more of our the intrinsic potential of our well-being into situations where we're not demanding that our well-being depend on the situation being comfortable and convenient for us and not challenging. But it's, so I recommend that. Those are my thoughts for the morning. Do you have any initial additions?
Well, one thing Dora mentioned recently, we should tell stories about teachers who are still alive that people could potentially connect with. And so if you've ever met Kimpo Rinpoche, that guy has a joyful mind, and he has this habit of being delighted by stuff. I got to drive him around when he was here in Portland, and there were at least 5 times between here and the place where he was going to speak that he was like, "Ooh, look at that," and it was very sweet, but it seemed like he cultivated the habit of being delighted by stuff, and so he was just delighted by stuff, and it was a kind of it was a real pleasure to be around that guy. And then the other thing I was thinking about, so I was asked to give a presentation to our cancer research coordinators who had a lot of questions about how they should relate to their patients when the patients aren't doing well. Because their job is sort of to coordinate these research protocols for people who have pretty advanced diseases and sort of increasingly few options. And one of the questions was, is it okay to be cheerful? Like when we're talking to them. And my question then was, well, is that how you really feel? Are you cheerful because you're feeling joyful? Or are you cheerful because you're kind of putting on a cheerful face because that's your way of interacting with the world? And my experience is that if you experience joy in the presence of somebody who's really having a difficult time, if you're, sort of present with them and joy arises and you share it with them, then it's a wonderful thing. On the other hand, if you're using sort of a false cheerfulness because you want to, you think it's your job to keep everything positive and it's not really coming from an honest place, then that can backfire. And there's this thing, it's if you share your grief with another, your grief is halved. If you share your joy with another, your joy is doubled. And so that's sort of the magic calculus of why the world is joyful. And then I have this quote that the person who's best at this is one of our medical assistants who's worked in our infusion unit for maybe 20 or 25 years. And I asked him, well, how do you, because he's always cracking jokes and kind of happy and energized. And I asked him, well, how do you do this with people? And so he emailed me back, and he said, I'm not sure how to answer this. I have no magic formula. Basically, I get great joy in being able to help someone who needs help. I try to treat every patient with as much friendship as I can genuinely create. A smile on your face and a good handshake or hug can go a long way in aiding someone through a difficult situation. You patients are especially in need of this, having just received devastating news, and are now wondering who's going to take care of it. It is a privilege for me to introduce them to the people who are going to do just that. I have a great amount of respect for those entering our doors and greatly admire their courage, strength, and the love shown by their family and friends. I never forget that there is absolutely no reason that our roles aren't reversed, and I can only hope that I can be as brave as they are. In all my interactions, I try to remain positive. Not to the point of telling them they're going to be cured, but always telling them how great they look. Or, if they don't look great, just telling them it's good to see them. There's enough negativity in their lives. I hope this is of some help to you. If I think of anything else, I'll let you know.
Miriam.
Thanks so much for that topic. I've spent a good deal of my life being a very negative person, and within the last few years I've really made conscious effort to change that for both my health and the benefit of the people I work with. Someone in this room some time ago talked about that there is no such thing as compassion fatigue, that a study was done with a monk, and the monk was asked to feel the pain of the person who was having a great deal of trouble, and that exhausted him. But when they said meditate on compassion for that person, he could do that till the cows came home, so to speak. And I've discovered that that's the key also when I'm dealing with people. I can, maybe the moment isn't a great one, but I can offer compassion, and there's joy in knowing that I can help through that, and joy in knowing that I might offer something to someone, even if it is just a smile and a handshake. And wow, that really does suck, a statement about, acknowledging that what they're dealing with is difficult. So that's all I have to share. Thank you for letting me share it.
How did you discover that moment where you saw that there was actually an alternative to the patterns that you found not helpful?
Well, that's been building up over time. Many, many years ago, someone gave me a book about I think the title is You Can't Afford the Luxury of a Negative Thought. And I tried, but I didn't have, for whatever reason, I didn't have the ability to continue with that. And I think about 2.5, 3 years ago, this may sound odd, but I even have the date. It was about 2 years ago, March 6, I think, of 2014. I discovered that I was lacking in compassion for myself. I figured this out logically, because that's the way I thought. Everything was very logical. And I realized logically that I could not return the energy to the universe that I had taken out of it, because that's a violation of one of the laws of thermodynamics. And I thought, what I'm asking myself to do is impossible, and that's lacking in compassion. And finally, that was the key that unlocked my own compassion for myself, and then ultimately for others. So, of course, being around here didn't hurt.
It helps to have a little support,
Yeah.
have the tide running with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting that you could identify a day, and as I can look back, and I don't know what day it was. I could probably figure out it with great forensic difficulty, but I know that I know that moment of actually discovering it. It's not to say that's how it is universally, but it's when you see it like that, and you see the kind of the stark relief of it's actually leaves an impression. Marcy?
Sometimes it's hard for me to wrap my head around like the sort of didactic nature, is that the word, or the simultaneous teaching on, always keep a joyful mind. And then there's like in another, I think it was a mind training book that I was just reading recently, where they're talking about the four thoughts and talking about, cultivate despair so that you have a very intense wish to, achieve enlightenment and escape samsara with everyone else. So it's a really interesting contradiction in a way, but I'm wondering if, so I guess my question would be, is there something around just the piece of acceptance around suffering that can allow the joy, or because there is something that sometimes it just feels like I have to move back and forth between these things, and I don't know what the question is, but I find it a little bit confusing sometimes, and I think I can fall into that trap of why Buddhism gets the bad rap for being a depressing religion of like,
Sticking with the first two noble truths would be pretty grim. It is interesting, because there is a way in which, unless we actually spend some time to look kind of just really look kind of, we could say, dispassionately at circumstances in our life and the way, and just look at our own minds when we say, I think I'll just let the mind settle on the breath, and then we discover it's done all kinds of things. And we go out in our life and we discover that our mind has done all kinds of things, and we're quite wrapped up in things. It is kind of shocking, but without that, the investigation of that, and the downsides of being lost in that, it's hard to have the motivation to do anything different. It's like, problem? What problem? And I think sometimes that kind of denial is reinforced by the sense of, well, if there was an alternative, I might look critically at the situation and think about what I might do differently. But as long as I can't see that there's an alternative, that's something much more positive is possible, then it's like, I don't even want to go there. I don't want to look. So it is, I think, something that takes some work. It takes some work, and what you're talking about sounds like the process of discovering the overall dynamic. That until we go really deeply into it, it does feel like we're flipping back and forth between things. Just like it can feel like, oh, when I'm sitting down and cultivating calm abiding, that can feel very self-centered when we go, oh, well, that was nice to be able to just let the mind relax a little bit. And we're narrating that story ourselves. And we feel like, well, here I am, sitting here feeling calm and quiet. What about everybody else? I could just sit here, I think I'll just sit here and feel calm and quiet all by myself. Like that. But without discovering that calm and quiet, we actually don't have much to bring to anyone else. What we bring to everybody else is the confusion. So the same thing, I think there is this kind of back and forth between the starting to see, to cultivate this positive outlook in the midst of everything, but also appreciating the dynamics that cause, that are or the confusion that is the source of all the stuff, all the dissatisfaction and the suffering and all that. So, but I think they actually go together. At the beginning, it may feel like these things are fighting. They're like, this one pushes this one over here, and then this one pushes that one out. It's like kids in the back seat. But at a certain point, you go, no, wait. Actually, each one can create space for the other. The more that we can discover our own potential for well-being that isn't dependent on circumstances, the more we can feel that we can afford to look at the dynamics of confusion, that we can I don't quite like the word accept, but that's used rather frequently. The more we can kind of accept others and what they're doing, and accept the fact that we do get caught up in our own confusion. We can meet that. I think perhaps better than accept, which means to me it's kind of like, well, okay, I'll take that perspective on. It's more like meeting the situation of confusion, and meeting others without, who are in states of confusion, dissatisfaction, suffering, to actually be able to meet them very directly without needing to run away or needing to get lost in whatever the story is. Both those things, the getting lost in the story and running away are kind of two reactions if we don't actually have that kind of the common word is kind of the centered place of being able to relate from a kind of a place of stability and sanity. So I think it's a back and forth thing, but the more we can start to look at it, to actually use the conscious process to say, well, actually this could provide more space for me to look at this, and appreciating the difficulties might give me more impetus to go deeper into discovering my own potential for well-being, the non-conditioned, non-dependent well-being.
You said that this feeling of well-being in your experience was more or less innate. And I'm wondering where this experience comes from.
Where does any experience come from?
Okay. Well, yes. In your case, it being innate, probably for some other people they have this, that's not the problem for them. Where does it come from? However you want to answer that.
Okay. As a practical matter, it is necessary to look to see how all experience arises. that's, that actually, to answer the question with descriptions or labels or these things, oh, well, it comes out of Buddha nature. Next. And I'm like, just how helpful is that? Because we can say things like that, and we do say things like that over and over and over, but I doubt that actually made the difference, which, oh, it all comes from Buddha nature. Okay, thanks everybody, I guess I don't need this anymore. We're there. It doesn't work like that. So actually discovering how experience unfolds, how it arises, including that sense of an observer to the experience, as opposed to an observed experience. This kind of investigation actually does lead to this place of seeing. And in that, the notion that the sense of freedom, the sense of kind of innate's a kind of funny word too. Intrinsic, innate, but they're all kind of beating around the same bush. So let's just kind of be a little loose about it, not too technically philosophical. But the more we can see that we're actually not trapped by whatever is arising in the mind, that if A comes up, we don't actually, it's not necessary to go to B. Miriam was talking about, you had a particular habit pattern of A would, B was like, sort of, and then B had another C that was also kind of, and like that. And to see that we can actually drop that, just to be able to see that we can drop it without aggression, that we're actually not trapped. That's one of the first things in calm abiding practice that we have to, we tend not to give credit to it, because another C comes up and another D and then G and then H, but just to see that it's possible one time completely without any aggression, just to let something go. That's actually proof of concept right there, that we're not trapped. And we often think of well-being as this kind of I like cookies and I like chocolate chip cookies, so I always go to the example of when somebody brings me cookies, they're the kind that I like, then the kind of reactions that I have, this is my definition of well-being. That I'm sitting around waiting for cookies. I'm moping and waiting. None of you have been kind to me. You haven't brought me cookies. But the kind of well-being that is more fundamental is not sort of this kind of this temporary giddy pattern. So but finding this is, I think it's a gradual process, and we can make philosophical statements about it, and we do, just to kind of fill in the time, I think, while we want our minds to have something to occupy itself. Well, it actually needs to do the work of actually discovering how our experience arises and how our connections to others actually exist. What is this dynamic play of experience? What is that?
It reminds me of a poem, a little that everyone's probably seen, where the line is, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. And so it's like finding a crack, right?
That's a good poetic expression.
Yeah.
I think this actually the fact that you found that as kind of a thread, kind of open something up. I think we can all find things like that.
Yeah.
And for some, it may be a very intellectual proposition. For others, it can be something entirely different. It can be very, very different. But that's a good example of that's your crack that lets your light shine through.
Yeah.
I feel like there's something, somehow there's something different between the dark side and the light side that you're talking about. so if our experience, and I think the teachings would say that our experience comes out of causes and conditions. So it's like our karma ripening, it's stuff that, from way, way, way back, it's just led to this and led to that, and interacted with this, and produced this. So that produces these different things, which we then label, ooh, bad one, ooh, good one, ooh, whatever, doing that. So, but that whole thing, as we know, that whole way of responding to what arises is not helping us get anywhere, except just more of the same. And, so I feel like the looking at that element of suffering, one thing we're looking at is like kind of what causes the bad stuff. But we're also looking at what causes this whole game to be continuing. And that's sort of a deeper point. So when we can let go of a negative response to what's happening, we start seeing we're not only giving ourselves kind of a good experience, it's sort of probably part of it's just like a relief, or like letting go of that thing that was sort of overtaking us in a negative way. But it's like we're able to not just convert to now something good, but actually we're sort of seeing that freedom from this whole back and forth. So I think we kind of do both. Like in some ways, we're just improving our temporary experience as we're able to let go of things and look at things differently and recall the sense of bringing, out the joy. But I think it leads to a deeper and more profound joy. It's not just sort of the opposite of the bad things that happen. So, but even if let's say we got pretty far along there, we still need to contemplate, we do still need to look and see, wow, other people are suffering. There's a lot of suffering still. And most of us still have a lot of it ourselves. But even if we would get beyond that, I think we have to look at the suffering side in order to have the motivation to carry this further, and not to just sort of get a little ways with it and say, well, I feel a little better, so that's good enough. But like actually we're looking ultimately towards the complete liberation of everyone from this whole cycle of existence. So you do have, I think we do have to look at the suffering, but this cultivation of the joy is part of the path, and then I think it becomes also part of the fruit, where it becomes more and more profound. And they talk, you read the great songs of our yogi forebears, and they talk about, amazing states of bliss and all of this, which must happen.
They do happen.
So I think it gets deeper and deeper, but we start getting a little bit of that.
Just to amplify the point of there's the part that we cultivate as the path, and there's also the aspect of the fruition too. And in this case, the cultivating this, reminding ourselves that we constantly we have some freedom, and then engaging in kind of positive things along the way is very, very helpful. Like the stories of the yogis, the example of Khenpo Rinpoche, these are kind of clear indications that the fruition, it's kind of, this is a natural aspect of the fruition of the path. Yes. Remind me your name again.
Sivai,
Siva.
yes. I wanted to comment on what Eric said earlier about the monk. I didn't get his name, and how he is a teacher, and yet when he was here, he found beauty and excitement in whatever that he saw here in Portland, and it reminds me of my students. I teach 5th grade, 30 of them, rambunctious as my friend Diane describes my 17 boys and 13 girls. So I'm suffering. I'm grieving the death, both Michael and I are grieving the death of our son Christopher. He was 26, and he died of heart attack. Unbeknownst to us, he had there was any issue with his heart. One of my 5th grade boys asked me about 4 weeks ago when he came to read to me, and he said, and he's a refugee from the Middle East, Iraq. He said, "Mrs. Bennett, please don't be upset with me, but can I ask you a question?" And I had no idea what question the child was going to ask. And he said, "Is it true that your son died?" And I was shocked. I had no idea. The 4th graders last year knew, but their teachers told them, and I said yes. And then the child saw that I was overwhelmed with grief, and I didn't say anything. And then he said, so now this 10-year-old is showing compassion. And he said, I had 2 uncles died in the war. And I said, I'm sorry. And now we're both sitting quietly. And I'm trying to find a way to continue. And then I asked him, how did you find out? And he said, Miss Kling told us. The children noticed that I wasn't at school for several weeks. So I paused for a while, and then I said, please read. And he never mentioned that again. But I think it brings to me how we all are mourning the death of our friends and family members. I heard that you all are getting together this morning to remember one of the loved one of the community, and I send my condolences. You two just came back from a funeral back east, and I send you my condolences. But I think it's wonderful to have a community such as we have found here, where we have compassion for each other. And I thank you for being our teachers. Last week, I enjoyed coming, and then today. And I think it's very important when we're suffering that we find ways to reach out and support one another. And Diane, I went over and told Diane about my son, and she and I have been very good friends since spring. And so I want to thank you all for the good work that we're cultivating here. And thank Buddha for his teaching.
Right now, I just want to sit with that, because I don't know that there's too much more that we can say. And sometimes I think it's just good to sit with these things. And I'll also acknowledge my sense of gratitude for everybody here and for all that it's been possible for me as well. So maybe we can sit for a minute or two before just.
Virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you all. Miriam asked me to remind you of something. There's all these little details that we can attend to take care of each other as a community. And one of them is Miriam has with one of her jobs is to organize things for the setting up the altar things at the beginning and welcoming everybody as part of that. She reminds people that it's helpful to arrive a little bit early. And I had to say, oh, you mean me too?
Oh, no, not.
We were all, Eric came in just even a little later than I did, so. But it is helpful to create the space. This is not a moral, you must do this, but it just helps there are ways that we help create the space for our practice. And one of them is by coming so we can start to bring our own settledness as opposed to like I do, trying to run across the street at the last minute.